Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Lunchtime Learning. I am delighted to be joined by Nick. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. Clarke, the first pioneer of IAD UK, a super agent who's had a really fascinating career. Been in France, been on Come Dine With Me, and we're going to hear a lot more about that very shortly. So Nick, firstly, thank you very much. Apologies if I got your name wrong, but very welcome to Lunchtime Learning. So how did you get into agency in the first place? What's your story?
I was never very academic at school, and I think my parents were constantly trying to think, what's he going to do in life? And I wasn't really sure myself. So my mum had a friend that had a franchise of Winkworth, and I was sent off to do work experience there at some point when I was 18. And I really enjoyed it. And they more or less offered me a job straight away. And I actually said, well, no, I'm going to uni, so I've got to get that done first, even though I was doing history of art, so another completely non-academic and fairly useless subject. But then literally the day I finished my last exams at uni, I headed down to London, started working with the same franchise at Winkworth. And at 21, I was just thrilled to be earning some money and to have a little company car and a job, because it all felt very grown up. And that's pretty much how I started.
Okay, and then from Winkworth, where did you go?
So I started in lettings as a junior lettings neg. And then I became a senior lettings neg, and then moved on to a different company. I was still a senior neg, but then I was made assistant manager of 6 different offices. And then I decided to break into sales because I was never earning as much as I wanted to. And I did a bit of sales in Battersea for a company that's no longer Douglas and Gordon. Well, they are still the set. They're a broker model now and no longer a traditional employed model. And then I went from there into their Kensington, Notting Hill office. And from there, I went into Belgravia as a sales neg for a company that, again, no longer exists because it was bought out by Knight Frank, but it had been there since 1715 or something. And from there, I went into property finding, self-employed for a company. I don't know if they still exist. And then I decided to move out to Wiltshire, where I'm actually from, and set up my own property finding company, which worked really well until I was hammered by the tax man. And I discovered the challenges of trying to completely run your own business on your own, the costs associated with SEOing and everything else. And it was then that I broke away to France, initially because my other half was French, and we had just bought our first house, and we looked at the interest rates and the cost of, the fact that we'd be paying a mortgage till we were 64. And that if we moved to Brittany, where my other half is from, and we could buy a sort of house we could never dream of owning in the UK cash. And it was when we'd renovated that and went on to sell it that I experienced how poor a estate agency was in France. Really shocking experiences with, from when you signed the terms of business, it took about a month until the property even appeared online, with dark photos, viewings being cancelled at the last minute without any communication. It was a shocking experience, really. I ended up selling the house myself on Facebook. And I thought, well, I mean, I could clean up with my experience in the UK if I applied a bit of UK commercialism to this market. If I could find the right partner, I could clean up. So I joined IAD. Funny story, because the mentors that I met at the time, because my French wasn't 100%, they weren't super keen to have me on their team. And I was kind of passed from pillar to post until somebody agreed to take me, as it were. But in my second year, I ended up top in sales out of the whole French network of, at the time, I think we were 12,000 agents. So the ones that had turned me down, I think, regretted it quite strongly at that point. And I went on from there to build a team. And so, having been the only IAD agent in my area of a very rural part of central Brittany, I left a legacy of 12 agents when I moved back to the UK to launch IAD in the UK. And I was able to launch IAD in the UK because of my success in France. I was able to discuss with the directors how well I thought the model would work in the UK. At the time, self-employed agency wasn't really a thing. EXP were there a bit in the background. There were a few other players that were quite small and not really gaining much traction. But with all the due diligence it took and identifying a company to purchase for launch, it took probably about 2 years from when they said, yeah, let's go to the UK to actually opening here. So I moved back a year ago. We acquired David Lee, who we thought were a good fit, an independent estate agency model based near Stansted, but they had a good covering in that East Anglian area and in the Midlands. And we thought a really good fit of model, and we liked David and Lee. And here we are. So we're 7 months in now as IAD UK, and our numbers are upping. I'm growing my team. My partner is also at IAD and manages the team that I set up in France, and they're still doing really well and carrying on what I started in the area we were in France. And that's pretty much from day dot to now.
Right, loads of questions. So if I can go back right to the beginning then, what lessons did you learn from going, from starting at the beginning, coming out of university, going from a junior negotiator to a senior negotiator? Because there's going to be a lot of people watching this that are starting at the beginning, maybe just leaving university. So my son's potentially going to university, but he's on a work placement at the moment with location. So right. What tips can you share? What did you learn?
What did I learn? Well, I was quite immature when I started out. I was 21 or whatever I was. So I had a lot of fun mainly, and actually carried on that same kind of the drinks after work at the end of the week was just as important as the work that was being done during the week. But yeah, I enjoyed it. It felt, when you're young and you start out, it feels like a real, you feel quite grown up to have a job and to have a company car and to be behind a brand, and you're proud of the brand. And I think the only thing I'd say that I kind of taken away from employed estate agency compared to, discovering the IAD model is the lack of training. There was never really any formal training that I experienced. So I very much felt I was kind of, for want of a better word, dragged up by, the manager or the more experienced agents around me. And so I suppose I just kind of progressed by being successful and kind of learning my own path and my own techniques. But I've always enjoyed talking to people, and that was a massive part of, I enjoyed architecture and talking to people. So I think combination of those two things are what enabled me to succeed.
Thank you. So obviously you went from lettings to sales. What did you see the differences there, and what did you learn from that?
Again, I kind of just, I wanted to go into sales because I thought I'd earn more money, quite simply, because it doesn't seem to matter how successful I was in lettings. I just never banked what I needed to live in London, paying rent and everything else. And so I kind of just put myself out there as I can do sales, but I'd never done it before. And again, there was no particular training. So I felt a little bit like I was blagging it at the beginning, if that's fair to say. But I got on with it. And I managed to build up a career and kind of progress into the central prime market. But I think what I realized that I enjoyed most about the process was, again, helping the buyers, rather than feeling I had to flog a particular house or flat because my manager was under pressure to shift it because she was the one that had valued it. So that's why I went more into the property finding side of things from there.
So what was it like then starting your own business?
Exciting, but again, really daunting. I think, because my partner was self-employed, that sort of inspired me a bit to take the leap of faith in that respect. I suppose what was fairly scary at the beginning was the investment into creating a website and SEOing it and going out there and finding your first business and placing your first advert in a magazine, and then trying to turn that into something, writing your own contracts as well, and thinking, oh, these actually watertight. Should I be consulting a solicitor? I'm not really sure. But I really enjoyed it, and it worked out really quite well until I got my first tax bill in January, and then I couldn't really afford to SEO my website again. And I think I just went on holiday with my first commission without really planning forward. So that's sort of what made me think I might go find a partner to move forward with business-wise.
Okay, so going over to France, and literally showing, I suppose, your capabilities, being in the top two very, very quickly. So what do you think it took to become that top performer?
I think I had a combination of advantages on my side. One was that sort of UK commercialism, which is not necessarily something that's automatically in the French ethos. So I applied that, and also the pressure of the London market meant that I was, reactive and always kind of trying to get a sale or an offer over the line quickly. I think when I arrived in the area of Brittany where I was, it was quite common practice for a house to take anything between a year and 10 years to sell, and no one really thought that was particularly abnormal. I was also absolutely amazed that fees could be as high as 10% sometimes. So I also arrived in an area where I was the only IAD agent at the time, and so IAD was still, we were kind of well on the way to becoming a leader and growing really quickly in France, but there was very little to no coverage in my area. There was only the notaire, which, if you're not familiar with the French system, is a sort of he's the local solicitor or conveyancer, but he can also actually sell properties on the side, because automatically a lot of business comes his way. So he kind of had the market cornered, and I just intentionally set my fees as just slightly lower than his to get myself known. And once I built up a good business, I then sort of set myself at the same level as him. But I think, apart from the commercialism, it was the fact that I quickly learnt to be bilingual in French. There were a lot of expats in the area as well, so I was able to treat vendors and buyers that were British expats, as well as dealing with the local French community. And I think just because, we at IAD we were over 200 sites to advertise a property in France. I know that's not the case in the UK because it's not necessary, but our online presence was so vastly superior to that of the notaire that I think that was another of the reasons that I was able to sell properties in a matter of months rather than years. So I think people just sort of saw my boards going for sale, sold, for sale, sold, and they thought, crikey, what's this guy doing? And the instructions came to me then quite comfortably for years afterwards. I never really had to do any of the door knocking or anything. So,
okay. So coming back to the start, then, how did you manage to build that brand? What were you doing to get your name out there?
Lots of boards. I wasn't particularly aware of the importance of Facebook, because whereas in the UK, I think it's probably more Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. In France, it's all about Facebook. And I didn't really harvest the full power of that until somebody told me about it in a training session in France, I think. And so I set up my page and I started posting properties on there even before I published them on the portals. And eventually I even managed to actually sell properties through my Facebook page, because people knew I put them on there before I put them online, which meant that, sometimes they even sold off market, which was kind of unheard of in a really sleepy, rural, snail-paced market.
Thank you. So you've mentioned fees, and there's obviously a big difference in UK fees and the fees in France. What do you think agents can be doing in the UK to get the fee that they deserve?
It's a very good question. It's something I talked about on LinkedIn the other day, because I think it's very easy to undersell yourself in the UK to compete with your competitors. It hasn't been helped by the likes of Purple Bricks, because I think, people look at it and go, well, if I can sell my house for 500 quid, I'll do that. But interestingly, everybody I've ever spoken to who's gone down that route wouldn't do it again, because they didn't feel comfortable with conducting the viewings, negotiating the offer, following the conveyancing process and all that sort of side of things. So there is, I think, what the sort of hesitate to say the failure of that model, or its sort of need to rebrand, has proven is that people definitely want a human heavily involved in the process of selling their house. It's one of the biggest, most important transactions that people make in their life, and sometimes one of the most emotional as well. And if you've got someone that's really there, that knows what they're doing, that holds your hand and talks you through the process and explains it sometimes for an individual in layman's terms, yeah, it's invaluable.
So why do you think it's a race to the bottom here? How can agents demonstrate that they are worth their 2%?
I think that I think the self-employed model will do that. I know that, you know, from when I was an employed agent, it was very easy to kind of hide behind the brand, but there also wasn't that consistency of experience for the client, because, you know, the manager did the valuation, the negotiator did the viewings, then the manager normally took back the negotiation most of the time, and then somebody else did the conveyancing. So, and I know that's still the case with a lot of high street models, let's say. So I think that there's a sort of lack of consistency, and there's also a lack of accountability. It's very easy for someone to put their hands up and go, I dropped the ball. And someone who was involved, who might have inspired the confidence or won the trust at the beginning, loses out, but doesn't really have any control over it. So I think that consistency of experiences, someone buys into an independent agent when they do the valuation and they give them the instruction, and then they have that same agent doing the viewings and negotiating the offer and helping them through the conveyancing and obtaining the document the solicitor needs when they don't know where to start, that sort of thing. And have a positive experience, because also that self-employed agent is out to get their commission, because they live or die on that commission. They don't have a basic salary to fall back on, so they want to see that transaction over the line. They need the recommendations off the back of it to have continued business as well. So I think clients will look at that and they'll think, well, actually, you know, that agent worked really hard on that, and that was a really positive experience, and I would recommend them, and they really justified their fee. And I think that will help to keep fees up. I hope so
too, because I don't think and it's most probably our fault that we don't explain enough what we do for the investment in our services. I think the assumption is all we do is put a property on a portal when it gets sold, you know, and you mentioned there all the different steps that an agent does, but how well do we communicate that out there and educate the public what we actually do? And, you know, one of the things that I think is really important, and you talked about before, Purple Bricks, is making sure that I'm dealing with a skilled negotiator who's going to get every last single penny for me. And how many agents are really skilled negotiators? You know, how many agents get excited because they know that they've got an offer which is acceptable, but they don't push to get that extra, you know, whatever it is. So that could be a life-changing amount.
You know, it's not something that every agent feels comfortable with. It's one of the things that I always really enjoyed. I love the thrill of negotiating an offer. And when I was self-employed in France, I'd sometimes be sitting there doing it by the fire of an evening at 10 o'clock at night, with a glass of wine in my hand, because I was really enjoying it. And I knew that, you know, I was going to get the commission at the end. The vendor was getting the higher amount they needed. I was managing the buyer's expectations on, you know, that they were paying the right price, and that sort of side of things. So, you know, I really enjoyed it. We actually had quite an interesting image that we shared in France of an iceberg, the tip of the iceberg, what the vendor sees and what they don't, which sort of refers back to the point you made earlier. The amount of work that an agent puts in behind the scenes is enormous, and I think goes unappreciated. And if you properly communicate what you're doing all the time to the vendor, then I think they understand how much work you're putting in. It's not as simple as opening a door, doing a viewing, taking an offer and jumping on to the next.
Couldn't agree more. So can you share some of your negotiating skills then? A couple of tips that will help people become better negotiators.
I don't know. I think it's something that I've always done. I love trying. I'll bargain on anything. It's possibly something I was born with, so it's always hard to explain. But I try and, you know, I have had some members of my team, for example, in France, who haven't felt very comfortable negotiating an offer, and so I've said, right, you know, come round, or I'll come to you and I'll do it for you, and you can be there in the background answering any questions that, you know, some bits of information I might need to know, and I'll show you how I do it. And I think it's just not being afraid to say, well, look, here's the argument as to why this offer is reasonable and why you should be accepting it in the case of the vendor. And you need to have sort of proper backup arguments. If you can't do that from experience, i.e. I sold a similar property for X price in a similar market X months ago, then you need to be able to back it up with comparables. And you know, you either, as we've got in the UK, we've got a great tool that enables you to do that. So if it's something you don't have the experience on, you need to be able to have a sort of, well, almost a list of really well-studied comparables in front of you, saying, well, look, this is why this is a reasonable offer. This is why your buyer's in a good situation. And you've got to really have inquired with that buyer as well, qualified them to make sure their mortgage is approved, or they definitely are cash when they say they are cash, that they definitely are chain free, or whatever it is. So I think if you've studied all elements and go in well prepared, and then don't be afraid to, you know, you are the expert. I think that's what people often forget as an agent. You're the expert. It's your career. You're not just an estate agent, which often, you know, it's not a very well reputed career sometimes. You're an expert in what you do, and don't be afraid to explain that and communicate that to your vendors and buyers when you're negotiating.
100%, couldn't agree more. So you talked earlier about building a team. You've worked with a lot of people. What do you think the qualities are for being a top performer, being a super agent?
Do you know what? One thing that, again, IAD France taught me, and I brought back to the UK, is that there is no set profile of what makes a good or bad estate agent. I think the mistake, if you look at estate agents in the UK, generally they tend to be white men of a certain age, who have a certain kind of quite salesy, outgoing manner. And that isn't necessarily the only profile that works. You know, if I look around at a convention in Paris, for example, when all the agents group together in France, and I look around the room, and you've got all different shapes and colors, and even tattoos on their face, and you know, not the sort of people that would be employed in a traditional estate agency. But guess what? They're dealing with clients that look like them and therefore relate to them, or you know, have a similar background and therefore relate to them. So I think what we often forget is actually people want a human estate agent, not just a typical estate agent. And again, I think, you know, that's something I'm looking at quite closely when I'm building my team in the UK, is I want a really varied group of people with different experiences and different approaches and different personalities, because they'll all appeal to somebody and be successful in their own right based on their different sort of identifying factors.
Okay, so success leaves clues. Who inspires you?
In the estate agency world or in general?
Either or, your choice.
I've got a great mentor, upline mentor in France, who she really was one of the early adopters of IAD in France when it was growing. And she certainly set out to be a good mentor. So she wanted to be omnipresent, always available for them, to focus heavily on training them, to make sure that in supporting them when they had a problem. And as a result, she's gone from sort of 10 people to, I think she's got 300 people on her team now. And she still is as present and available for me and my downline as she is for all those 300 people. I don't know how she does it. I think she must be superhuman. But it's something that I will certainly always try and do and replicate for my team, be they in France or England. So I'd say she's been a huge inspiration. But the inspiration of the founders of IAD really as well, and them having the vision for what they created, which at the time was completely unique, and in my opinion still is a unique and very inclusive model.
Okay, so importance of a mentor. How has that mentor helped you? You know, why should people go out and have mentors?
I think when you're self-employed, and certainly when I had my own business and I was completely on my own, I never had anyone to ask questions about what I could possibly be doing differently if something wasn't working, or where to start with something I hadn't encountered before. And you know, when you have your highs and lows, apart from your other half, you've got no one to share those with. And they might not have experience in the same career path as well, so they won't understand it in the same way. And I think what a mentor does is a number of things, really. They impart their knowledge and experience. They train you and support you. I mean, if I look at my team, I'll pick up the phone to them if they're having a relationship problem, because that's just as important as getting them back on track to go out and be happy and carry on their job, as when they encounter a legal situation that they hadn't encountered. I know, I'll give a silly example, something like a flying freehold. What is that? So it's having someone that you can ask for these things. It's having someone to share the highs and lows of your job. It's having someone to celebrate, the end of the year with. It's having someone to say, well, how do I go about moving my business on to the next step? What am I not doing? Can you help me with this offer? There's so many different elements of support you need, I think, when you're self-employed. You need a mentor that can give you all of those things.
Brilliant. Final question. You mentioned quite a lot, training. I've heard it about 5 or 6 times in there. Why do you think training is so important? Not just in the estate agency, but I suppose obviously in any industry. And what would you recommend people to be looking at in order to improve and get better, please?
As I say, as an employed agent, I remember having had one bit of training at one company, and he had kind of reached out to somebody that had done some training for Virgin, who at the time were, very much a growing company, and they sort of gave us a bit of training on how to be a good salesperson. That's the only bit of training I ever had as an employed estate agent. So as I say, I was kind of dragged up by people's past experiences, and sometimes even not particularly ethical ways of working. And I didn't enjoy that. When I went to France, because the French market is different, there was so much to learn. And at the beginning, my French wasn't perfect, but it quickly improved, because you don't like to make linguistic mistakes professionally. It doesn't look good. So I just attended every bit of training that was out there and just soaked it all up, really. And it made me able to communicate what I was doing. Well, it helped me to win instructions, but also to then communicate the process with the vendors as well, to actually justify that fee and to show them what I was doing in terms of everything that was below the tip of the iceberg. So it's something that when we launched in the UK, have carried on. We've got Jason Ball, who I know he's got a great background in estate agency, and he's our head of training, and he is working on adapting the content that comes out of France to the UK market, as well as writing stuff that is completely unique to what we do here. And then agents can do that in multiple different ways. So you can do it in a Q&A format through your intranet, you can join on a virtual training session, or you can attend a face-to-face. And again, apart from anything else, when you're on your own, just to feel like there's someone there giving you support and perhaps opening your eyes to some part of the business you might not have explored or encountered before, is valuable.
100%. So it's all great going to all the training, soaking it all in. What tips can you give to people actually to implement it and get it done?
There are different ways of working. And so if I look at my team that's sort of forming in the UK, and I look at their different profiles and speak to them and the way they work, and also depending on their different levels of experience, there are lots of different ways to take on training and when you do it. Some of them do the whole lot from the beginning before they even go out and get their first instruction. That's one way of doing it. I did it on the job because I'm a much more practical person. So I wanted to actually get my first instruction, even if I felt I was possibly winging it in France at the beginning a little bit, and then learn from my mistakes. And I think some people learn that better that way. So, the thing about IAD is nothing is ever obligatory, because you're self-employed and it's your business. It's always heavily advised and encouraged. But I think it's very much about adapting the way you learn to your own needs and ways of working.
Brilliant. Well, look, I'm really grateful for your time. So thank you very much. So Nick, how do people get hold of you, and if they want to find out more information about IAD?
Well, hopefully I'm all over LinkedIn. You can Google my very complicated name as well. And I've got a landing page on our own website. I'm on LinkedIn, and I talk on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok as well. So you can catch me on any of those platforms.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you everybody for watching and listening today. Really grateful. So please like it, share it, subscribe to the YouTube channel as well, and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks very much, Nick.
Thank you, Stephen.